Okay, so this is going to be my impressions for the Back for Blood beta. This is going to be an off-the-cuff, like stream of consciousness-esque video, which is some random gameplay clips in the background, maybe with some shop and UI stuff cut in when it's relevant. But this isn't going to be super edited or super well thought out. It's not scripted. It's just, you know, my current thoughts in the beta, having played it the past few days, and also while it's fresh on my mind. I didn't want to spend too much time making this video because I got other projects, other things I want to be working on, and I just wanted to get something out about it, sort of while the beta is still going on. This video is going to be structured as pros first and then cons second. Some topics I have both pros and cons, so if I have something negative to say about a specific topic, it'll be until after I talk about the pros. It's not going to be by category. So the first things I like about the game, the presentation I actually do like. I think the game looks attractive. I like the character designs aesthetically. I think they are all very cool. I think it's actually really cool that they have an elderly character in the game and a character who is more overweight. It's not just a bunch of hot people. And I'll be interested to see where it goes. I do, just based on some of the other character designs that we see in the menus and stuff, Doc seems also like it could be a cool character, and I'll be interested to see what else comes to the table. I also really like the UI. I think the UI in this game actually strikes a really nice balance between minimalist while also being thematic. A lot of times, a lot of games go way too minimalist, and it just sort of makes it look impersonal and kind of awkward. The game's UI looks good, has great icons, but still feels like it fits. In particular, like the corruption cards and the buy menu, I think looks good as well. Lots of good UI elements in this game. Second main thing that I really like about the game is the guns and the gunplay. Now, I must say right now that I'm definitely immediately judging this game within direct comparison to my personal experiences with Left 4 Dead and Left 4 Dead 2. So when I say I really like the gunplay in this game or the guns in this game, I'm not saying that it's the best in the world. And in fact, I think that in general, it's definitely played it very safe. Like there's very little recoil on a vast majority of the guns, which I think is obviously intended for the fact that it's a PvE game for the most part. Like they don't want you having a really hard time controlling recoil, killing zombies or anything like that. A lot of the guns are just nice and easy to use and relatively enjoyable. It's not crazy or anything. I think overall the reload animations are significantly better than, let's say, Left 4 Dead, and there's also a really nice variety of a lot of weapons. And I also personally like that there's ADSing in this game. It's not necessary, but I'm a huge fan of killing floor, so it's nice to see that ADSing is in this game. And further on to that point, I do really like attachments. I think they're fun, they're cool. I like being able to find all sorts of things, and there's some build choices to make here. It's not just get the better thing. Sometimes it is, but you have things like better magazines, faster magazines, better ammo, different types of stocks, some that reduce ADS time, some that just reduce mobility. So it's not entirely just, pick the better type of weapon. There are mechanics like that, of course, and we'll talk about some of those later in the cons, but for the most part, I do like the guns and gunplay in this game. In particular, I like the Magnum. I think the Magnum's super fun. The TAC-14, I think it's called, shotgun. I think that's really satisfying to use, has a really nice sound to it and all that. I think that's great. And once again, that is specifically with respect to the gunplay in Left 4 Dead comparatively. And then the other thing I like is the cards, or at the very least, the idea of the cards. There's some really interesting card designs currently in the game that actually can change the way that you play, and I think that is what I really like about the cards. But there's also some stuff that I don't like about the cards. We'll talk about that a bit later, but for example, I really like Combat Knife as a design. I think that's really cool because it allows your bash to work with other types of cards for synergy effects, which is really nice. I like cards like the one that allows you to shoot while sprinting. I think that one's cool. The cards that affect the poultice where you can heal over time when you heal on teammates, which encourages healing friendlies. I think stuff like that is very cool. Like I said, we'll talk more about it later because not all of it is completely balanced and things like that, but conceptually there's some really cool stuff going on here that I do really like. And in particular, what I really like is the corruption cards. Now, the corruption cards aren't all designed the same, obviously, but the gameplay you're currently watching is currently on Veteran. However, we have played on Nightmare, and what I will say is that the corruption cards get significantly more interesting on Nightmare. I found that in Veteran, a lot of the times you would end up seeing a lot of the same corruption cards that wouldn't really mean anything, where it's just sort of like, oh, these guys are armored, or they have like barbed skin or something like that. And it just wouldn't feel like anything's realistically different. On Nightmare, you have cards like, if you headshot enemies, they explode, you have enemies that are fire commons, blight commons, things like that, and they're actually way more interesting. Not to mention the challenge corruption cards, like the specimen container one in particular is really cool. Making it to where there's like way more alarms to trigger is also very cool, and like also asking you not to trigger any alarms and things like that. I think a lot of that stuff is very, very cool and has a lot of potential. There's some stuff there that's really fun and that actually feels dynamic. And like I said, in particular on Nightmare. Another thing that I really like, which this is more of a general vibe type thing, but it's sort of a culmination of multiple different mechanics, which is the fact that this game feels like a much slower, more deliberate game. And I think a lot of that is due to a lot of the macro elements. Due to the way the shop system works with copper and the way trauma works, you want to avoid damage as much as possible, and you want to explore and gather as many resources as possible throughout a run. So you're generally playing this game fairly slow, and you're playing it where you're constantly checking every nook and cranny, which I find to be pretty enjoyable. I think it's definitely a different vibe from Left 4 Dead. There's significantly less gauntlets in this game too, in comparison to Left 4 Dead. And nearly every campaign in Left 4 Dead, I feel like there was something where you had to sprint to the end, and we do see one of those in both parts of Act 1, to be fair, but they're generally very short, and then you usually double back or do something where you're like right after you like turn around and kill everything or something like that. So the game is definitely going for more of a defensive or slower paced vibe, especially when considering things like barbed wire and miniguns. And in general, I would say this is probably the thing that is most attractive to me about the game. Because of all of these different decision-making elements in the macro sense and the slower pace of gameplay, it gives the game enough of a unique feel that I think it's worth playing over other zombie games. And if there's one reason why if somebody comes up to you and say, hey, why are you playing this game instead of Left 4 Dead? That's the main reason. Not necessarily the cards, not necessarily the gunplay or anything like that, because all those things can change. All those things are balance specific or stuff like that. The main thing would be the flow of the game, I think, and that is the thing that is mainly attracting me to the game. The cards and the other things are cool, but it really depends on what is going to happen in the final game and how the balance is for that to really shine. So that's just something where I can't necessarily justify saying, oh, you should buy Back 4 Blood because of the card system, because we really don't know in the long run what's going to happen with that. We don't know what the balance will be like. If there's lots of cool builds and there's lots of cool corruption cards, then that'll be great. But if you're playing Veteran and you're getting all these really lame corruption cards and there really aren't that many builds, then the card system kind of falls apart. So that remains to be seen. Currently, I think there's some really cool things about it. I just don't think it's a perfect system, but I do really enjoy the flow of the game. So from a macro decision perspective, I really like the game. So now we'll get into the main things that I don't like about the game. The characters' dialogue I find to be relatively uninteresting for the most part, or the characters are frankly just flat out annoying. Like, I really like Holly's visual design, but her actual character is like incredibly annoying. Same thing with like Hoffman. Walker in particular is just actually flat out dead as a character. He hardly says anything ever. I don't think this can necessarily be, be said for every character or every single line in the game. I think there's some interesting things, and a lot of it you just have to keep replaying because they don't say everything every time. Depends very heavily on where you're at, what's happening, because you have to sort of have a calm moment in specific sections for certain pieces of dialogue. So, there's definitely more there to be explored that I haven't necessarily seen, but just off the cuff, I would say that I'm not a huge fan of the actual dialogue. The other thing is, and this is my most major complaint about the game, has to be the special infected and the design of the special infected. I honestly think that the special infected in this game are absolute trash. I am very surprised that they actually ended up in the game this way, and it's never going to change. It's not very likely to change anyways or in any significant way. So there's two major things that I dislike about the special infected. The first thing has to do with their visual design. So the special infected are actually different variations of the same base types. You have tall boys, stingers, I think they're called, or the jumpy boys. You have tall boys, jumpy boys, fat boys. They're reekers, as they're called. And so what that means is that actually, especially from very far away, it's incredibly hard to tell the difference between the two. And this obviously changes the more you play the game. Like, I'm actually able to see the difference between a wretch and an exploder now, but it still doesn't excuse the fact that at a glance, it's very hard to tell. For quite a few hours in the game, I could only tell the difference via subtitles. If it would say, exploder idle or something like that, it'd be like, oh, there's an exploder around. And that also doubles into sound design. There obviously are sounds for all of the special infected, but they're not mixed high enough. The only special that I can routinely understand or know when it's really close is a sleeper, because it sounds really loud and very distinct. And even though there are sounds for all these different actions as shown in the subtitles, it's really, really hard to tell. I really wish that was, they were much more visually distinct and aurally distinct. And then the other major thing is really their actual design. So when thinking about Left 4 Dead, all of the specials were incredibly archetypal. They had one very specific thing that they did, and they did it very, very well. They also weren't that hard to kill. Generally, if one player got hunted, another player could just turn around and kill that hunter, for example. And same thing with like smokers. The only really hard one to kill was a tank. And chargers were also, relatively easy to kill in comparison. In Back 4 Blood, especially because of the variations, a lot of these specials actually sort of bleed into each other. Chargers and bruisers are kind of different, but realistically, they all play very, very similar. Which is to say that the strategy to deal with almost every special infected is just focus fire the weak point. A lot of them simply run at you straight forward, and you just need to kill them. There aren't really a whole lot of CC abilities currently. There are a few special infected that currently aren't in the game, but based on what we see right now, the way the CC abilities work just isn't even close to as good as it is in Left 4 Dead, and I think that's also something that's very important. Like, crushers, they go right up to you and they grab you, and then they just like slowly kill you. Basically kind of like Dead by Daylight, almost in a way. But what it means realistically is that they actually play almost exactly like a bruiser. The whole point of a bruiser is if it gets close to you, it's gonna smash and it's gonna kill you. And the same thing happens with the crusher. I mean, what's the difference there? Wretches and exploders, even though they actually fundamentally cover entirely different ranges, wretches being ranged, exploders being close range, they're actually dealt with in very much the same way. Once you see it, you have to focus fire it down, because they're just these fat blobs. So like, even though the wretch is sort of intended to act like a spitter, it can't really play stealthy in any way, and it has a massive AoE and does so much damage that you just have to deal with it as soon as you see it, just like you have to do with an exploder. The thing is that In Left 4 Dead, the reason why Special Infected was deadly was because of synergy. The Special Infected themselves, outside of like the tank, wouldn't just run up and kill you in a lot of cases unless they were left unattended, or like, for example, a smoker pulled you into a horde or something like that. It was about a culmination of multiple different things. At one point I read a dev comment that basically said the reason why they chose the PvP mode that they did, the reason why there's no versus campaign, essentially, was because of the way they designed the Special Infected. They said the Special Infected are very good at ambushing, so we found that defending was better for our game than point A to point B. But I think that's kind of the complete opposite, and a lot of these problems would be fixed if the Special Infected were good at ambushing and had smaller models and more CC abilities, but were easier to kill. In my experience, it creates a significantly less dynamic game. It feels like a vast majority of what you're doing is kiting ridiculously tanky monsters, and this is especially true on Nightmare. On Nightmare, it's actually incredibly frustrating because, frankly, the Special Infected are way too tanky. They are way too tanky. It takes so long to kill a bruiser, especially because the game has these weak points. And weak points I don't think are a bad idea in a vacuum, but in this game, due to the balance of weak points along with the balance of cards, it seems like they're, and weapons too. This is gonna sort of bleed into my next complaint, but basically there's so many different things going on with the system here that it seems like they can't just have like something that's easy to kill, because if you start to scale up the difficulty, then you could have somebody with like an epic gun with all these different damage cards or something like that, and they could just immediately drop the special, and then the special doesn't matter. That kind of seems like what's going on here. It seems like they had to make all the specials stupidly tanky to avoid people from just steamrolling them. But at the same time, that's exactly where all the difficulty lies. The reason why Nightmare is hard is just because it takes forever to kill any given special, and they are also faster than you, and you kind of can't really realistically outrun them, even with Evangelo's movement speed buff, or at least in my experience, you kind of can't. Man, it's just not that interesting. On a micro scale, this game's decision making is way less interesting than Left 4 Dead's. It feels like there's two main issues. One is that players aren't making as many on-the-fly decisions in a horde, because when you see a special, they're just sort of going to run at you very slowly and hit you essentially. Whether it be wretches, exploders, or whatever. And the other thing is that one player can't really be a hero in the same way that it feels like in Left 4 Dead. Like if you see that smoker, if you see that hunter, and you headshot them, you like destroy them really fast, or somebody gets in a bind, and you really outplay or play really well and you save them, and it feels like you can be a hero. In Back 4 Blood, because everything's so tanky, it feels like if there's one person left and a bruiser, if they don't have any space to kite, then they're screwed. You kind of can't win, because they're faster than you and they take way too long to kill. And the weak point, especially for bruisers, is in such a bad place. This is significantly less of a problem for crushers, but for bruisers in particular, it's really bad, where you just straight up can't even deal realistically good damage as a single player. And exploders are also way too tanky, even if you hit their weak spot, because they run so fast. Wretches are the only, like, wretches and hawkers are kind of reasonable to deal with as a solo player, but even then, I don't know. They're just not, they feel like what they should be is more niche in use. Because they're all so tanky, they sort of end up accompanying this same design space from a gameplay perspective, right? There's nobody who's like sneaking behind you and ambushing you. You just have a lot of these things that sort of appear right in front of your face, and you just have to grind them down with damage, or you die and you lose, especially on Nightmare when you're being swarmed with 3 or 4 specials at once, like 2 bruisers in a row plus an exploder, right at the very beginning in the hotel can frankly mean instant death in some cases, if you get unlucky with the way the exploder works, or your ordering and stuff like that. Sleepers are a bit of an interesting design as well. Instead of a traditional hunter, they just have the sleeper, and the hawker sort of takes the place of both a spitter and a hunter in a way, but not really. and they're interesting, I guess, but I'm not really sure why you'd have a static version of this. And they're incredibly easy. Like once you get, once you understand what they sound like, where they generally are and things like that, sleepers are an absolute joke to deal with. They're not even a problem. I don't understand why they even exist. Frankly, I think they're trying to reinvent the wheel in a way that isn't better. Like, why even have these changes in the first place? Just replicate the Left 4 Dead specials. I think it'd be a better game in general. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe that isn't the case, but personally, I think the game would be more enjoyable. I mean, maybe it'd be significantly easier, and it probably would be, that's true, but it'd be more enjoyable if you got rid of weak points altogether and just made special infected significantly easier to kill. If weak points are part of the reason why they're so tanky, then I would rather not have weak points at all. It's just not fun. It's really just not fun to have to grind down a bruiser. It's honestly crazy. Way too much. But moving on from that, as a more general point, which, like I said, is going to bleed in a little bit, it's that the balance of the game is kind of whack. And this is in a few areas as well. The balance with guns is really bad. I think not a vast majority, but I think a lot of the guns are imbalanced or just frankly completely ineffectual because of the thing I was talking about earlier. Because Special Infected are so tanky, the best way to play this game, in my personal opinion, is to use as high firepower as possible. Honestly, really fast firing weapons like the MP5, the Vector, the M4 are frankly pretty weak. There really isn't much reason to use a gun that can fire really fast because your main enemy is not common infected and never really has been. You can one-shot them in the head with a Glock. You don't need a Vector to spray down enemies really fast. You can't one-shot zombies in the chest like you can in Left 4 Dead. So having a weapon that fires really fast isn't really worth it. And frankly, especially in the longer levels later in the campaign we have in the beta, you need to conserve ammo as much as you can. So you're gonna be headshotting as much as possible. You really don't want to just be spraying down anyways. And because your main enemy are specials, a weapon like a Vector does pitiful damage, even on weak point. You're gonna be spraying 4 or 5 mags into it, whereas somebody with like a Phoenix 350L or an M1A or a ranch rifle or a TAC 14 is gonna be doing way more work than you. At the firing range, if you shoot an M4 carbine at a head, it does about 15 damage. If you shoot an M1A at a head, it does about 51 damage. So it's just under 4 times more powerful per shot. And that just, I don't know. In general, especially because of stagger as well, the TAC 14 is actually pretty good at staggering big enemies. I was consistently able to stagger bruisers with it, which is just incredibly useful in my personal opinion. Not to mention that, and this also bleeds into something else, the balance with cards. So the bash is incredibly strong. So you actually don't really care that a weapon takes a long time to reload in many cases because you just can equip combat knife, and combat knife is incredibly busted. I don't know if it should just be made baseline or whatever, but frankly, the ability to one-shot common while reloading is just insane. Not even coupled with the heal thing like everybody says. I mean, the heal thing is good especially on veteran, not so much on nightmare, because you just kind of take too much damage over time if you're not careful enough. And it does require some skill to use. I'm not gonna lie. It does require you to be very aware of the range of the combat knife and to make sure to position yourself in ways where you're not going to get surrounded in an arc, because the combat knife is incredibly effective in lines, but it has trouble dealing with enemies when they are completely surrounding you in a circle. So it's not perfect, it's not an end-all be-all, but it honestly is incredibly strong. It conserves ammo, kills things for free, allows you to reload, and it also allows those stronger weapons to be significantly more effective. If while you're shooting people, while you're reloading, you can kill people, it's just nothing but bonuses there. It's so incredibly good, especially considering that the base bash is actually pretty weak. There's really not much reason to use the regular bash, in my personal experience. if you can just use combat knife. So combat knife is a drastic balance thing. And furthermore, the actual like hordes of common in this game are quite low. And I think this is for two reasons. One, probably once they designed the special infected in the way that they did, they realized that there can't be that much commons because of how ridiculously tanky specials are. So they probably toned down the commons a little bit. But if you were to like rework the specials to where they were not nearly as tanky, you could then up the commons a lot, and then something like combat knife would actually become relatively balanced. I would say it wouldn't be that strong if there was way more common in general, and if they were also like nerfed a little bit to where you could one shot them in the chest. This game is incredibly headshot focused, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, but it definitely changes the balance in an interesting way where the guns are significantly more unified with regards to common infected because of that, right? Honestly, the main thing that would affect my enjoyment of the game in the long term is the special infected. Outside of that, I think most of my problems with the game, my issues with the game, do stem from balance things, and I think those can be changed relatively easily, or at least worked around. I doubt that, you know, everything I would desire to come into the game would come to fruition, but frankly, I would just like to mainly see changes with the special infected. As an overall view, what I would personally say is that this game has a much better macro decision making than Left 4 Dead, and in fact, I really like the way some of the mechanics work in this game. I think it's very good from a holistic perspective. Like I really like the way trauma works. I like the copper system, and I in general like the flow of the game a lot more than I do Left 4 Dead personally. I enjoy that it's much slower pace and it's much more exploratory. Like you're going to a lot of specific places to look for loot, you're opening up crates, you're finding gear and things like that, and I personally really enjoy that. I enjoy the slower, more thoughtful gameplay. But what I don't prefer is the micro gameplay as much as I do Left 4 Dead. Like I think when you're doing a horde or doing a finale, it's not as fun as it was in Left 4 Dead. Like No Mercy, Hospital, Hotel, absolute classic moment, but I think a huge part of that is the reason why is, you know, the design of the special infected and the way hordes work in Left 4 Dead 1. There aren't really moments like that in the same way as in Back 4 Blood because of the way the special infected are, frankly. So if that was to change, I think this game would become much better for me. And then outside of that, like I said, lots of smaller balanced stuff. Like I don't necessarily care that the combat knife is that busted. I suppose I would just rather it be like a baseline mechanic so I don't have to burn a card on it, but that's like, it's fine. It's not really that big of a deal. And you know, I'm not necessarily sure that there should be many damage increasing things in the game that don't have a negative attached to them as well. For example, I find that to be a bit poor, and also, you know, character balance as well. Forgot to touch on that, but like Hoffman, I think is just an absolute must in kind of every match because the way ammo works. Now this could actually be something where, like, you know, maybe if everybody's running combat knife and you're being really careful with your ammo, maybe won't be that big of an issue. It's also same thing with coordination. If people are sharing ammo, it's less of a problem, but I find that having those ammo drops constantly is just such a nice thing that I honestly can't see myself playing without Hoffman. And I would just be worried that would like continue on into the future with season passes and stuff. So to speak about the future of the game, the microtransactions, season pass and things, this game is coming to Game Pass, so I will personally be playing it. I hope to at some point beat, you know, the full game on Nightmare. I think there's supposed to be around 9 levels or something based on the way the PvP levels are numbered. So it's going to take a long time because Nightmare as it stands is ridiculously hard without like end game cards at the moment. So we'll see how that ends up going, but it should be plenty of content to play and stuff. But it's definitely not going to be like, you know, top tier game of all time type game, simply because of a lot of the shortcomings that I listed. Personally, for me, this game's probably about a 7 out of 10 at the moment. I think it has plenty of content. I think it's a lot of fun, especially with friends, but it's not masterpiece tier. I think in general, what I would say is that because this game is going to have seemingly a lot of maps, we don't know for sure, but seemingly a lot of maps, a lot of guns, a lot of characters, and it's going to be bringing even more to the table due to the fact that it doesn't have modding support, so we only really know about the season pass stuff. It seems to me like the game is definitely going for a quantity over quality type of philosophy on this one. There weren't really that many guns or characters or campaigns in Left 4 Dead, but they all felt like everything was incredibly well thought out, and I think a lot of the stuff was more memorable. I don't think that necessarily means that Back 4 Blood can't do the same. I think a lot of people have talked about how they aren't a huge fan of the maps and things like that. I do think that kind of remains to be seen. I think the very first act that we play, or not the first act, but the first level, 1112, the crossing, I think it's called. I think that one's just intended to be a short introductory thing, because the Blue Bell or Blue Devil or whatever it's called, the second part of Act 1 that we currently have is significantly longer, and I would say much better in a lot of aspects than the first one. So I think that just hopefully we get to see more consistent level design later on. So overall, it's fun. I'll be playing on Game Pass. I'll be trying to beat everything on Nightmare when it comes out, hopefully. Assuming I have a squad. If I don't have a squad, then I probably won't, because, to be honest, matchmaking in this game is an absolute nightmare. It's still fun just to run around and shoot zombies, but this game does require, or does have, a lot more decision making that just becomes pretty tough to deal with when in a matchmaking group that doesn't communicate. Also, just as a little side thing, I can't actually use voice chat in the game because of the way my audio is set up. The game naturally chooses a virtual audio cable, and I can't change the inputs in-game like I can for some other games. So because I can't change the inputs, my sound is just an absolute mess, and I can't use voice chat. So that would also be really nice if I could actually use voice chat, but I can't. But yeah, in terms of bugs, there's a lot of bugs that come up with party play. There aren't a whole lot of bugs that come up with zombies and stuff as far as I'm concerned, but there's a lot of weird things, like if somebody dies and then gets revived. Like one time I had a friend that was, not a friend, but it was a person in my party that was completely invisible after they got revived, and they were somehow magically reviving me and things like that. It was weird. I don't know if that was like a thing. Another time we had the situation where a person got downed completely. They were fully dead, and I had a defibrillator, but we had gone far enough into the level where it spawned the bot that sits on the wall. So whenever it spawns a character to be fully respawned, it spawns them as a bot, so that the player then takes control after the person spawns. I guess to allow the player to spectate while they're still being saved. But I had then defibrillated after the bot had spawned, and then we kind of had two bots, or we had one bot and one regular player. It was really weird what was going on. The player actually didn't have control of the character they were playing until they fully died again, I think. It was very weird, but there was this static version of the character that was just sitting in the middle of nowhere while the bot was actively playing. It was very bizarre. It didn't make any sense. And I've had a lot of bugs. It's very similar to that or related to that with regards to reviving. I think in the gameplay you're watching right now, I had a revive bug for the whole round, where whenever I went over a dead body, it had no prompt for me to revive, and that was a join in progress issue. So yeah, join in progress issues, revive issues, anything where you're sort of taking control over from a bot is a problem. I'm also not a fan of the fact that if you do join in progress and it's on the first map, or really in general, you don't get your default card. So a lot of times if I join in progress, I don't have combat knife, which is just frankly very annoying, because it's just, I've played so much with it, it's just core to my play style really, and it just, it's very frustrating when I don't have it. And yeah, so anyways, I think the game is a lot of fun. Just, feels rushed, I guess. I would really like them to go back to the drawing board with Special Infected, to spend a bit more time on some of the sections in the levels, and maybe with the guns and gun sounds and stuff like that too. But Other than that, I'll definitely be playing it on launch and hopefully having a lot of fun with it. So anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.